So the next one, financial accounting and controlling FICO, vendor master, especially in company code data. Step number 5, vendor withholding tax. Under the vendor withholding tax, the first topic, indicator for withholding tax type. Indicator for withholding tax type is SAP is used to specify which kind of withholding tax applies to the vendor or customer, such as income tax, service tax like a TDS, dividend tax, contractor tax, professional fees tax, etc. It tells SAP what category of TDS or withholding will apply when invoices or payments are posted. The purpose, this field activates withholding tax for the business partner, determines how tax is calculated, controls the tax rate, base amount, exemptions, and posting rules, allow multiple tax types for the same vendor if it is applicable. Example, a vendor may have like a type 43 like a TDS on contractor, maybe type 52 TDS on professional fees. SAP will apply the correct one based on this indicator. So where it is used in FI posting FB60 and Miro and F-02 vendor invoice and payment run F110. Then adjustment entries, tax reports, for example statutory TDS reports. So the next field is text 40 characters long. Meaning of this field is a free text field that allows users to enter up to 40 characters of descriptive information related to the vendor or customer. It is usually used to store short notes, labels, or reference text that is useful for accounting purpose. The text can be used for additional internal remarks, identification notes, short descriptions, business partner reference codes, information that does not fit into fixed fields. It is visible to SAP users but not normally printed on external documents unless specifically configured. So where it is found, this field may appear in vendor master, customer master, withholding tax details, certain document screens. So when we talk about the characteristics, maximum 40 characteristics, free format like letters, numbers, symbols. You can use alphanumeric, there is no any restrictions. Optional field used only for internal record informations. Examples, some typical entries, TDS exempt for financial year 2025, preferred transport vendor, works with the Chennai branch only, PAN pending submissions, annual contract vendor. The next field is withholding tax code. The withholding tax code in SAP defines the specific rules and percentage rate of withholding tax TDS that should be applied to a vendor or customer. It determines tax rate percentage and calculation base like a gross or net amount and rounding rules and posting accounts and when and how tax should be deducted. It works together with the withholding tax type. The purpose of this withholding tax code, SAP uses the withholding tax code to automatically calculate TDS or withholding during invoice or payment posting. And number 2, post the tax amount to the correct GL account. Number 3, ensure compliance with government tax regulations. Number 4, generate reports for statutory returns. So here it is the example, withholding tax type 43, withholding tax code 01, meaning TDS on contracted at 1%. Tax type 52, tax code 02, TDS on professional fees at 10%. Tax type 52, tax type 54, tax code 03, TDS on commission at 5%. If a vendor is linked to withholding tax type 43 and withholding tax code 01, so SAP knows deducted 1% TDS, use the specified posting accounts, apply during invoice and payment. So when it is used, withholding tax code is applied in invoice posting like the T code FB60, Miro FB70 and F-02, and payment run F110, adjustment postings, reporting statutory compliance, and data stores. Examples of rules inside a withholding tax code: tax percentage, minimum taxable amount, surcharges and cess, chapter or section reference, GL accounts for tax posting, whether tax is at invoice or payment. These are all the informations stored under the data, and difference between withholding tax type and withholding tax code. Withholding tax type, category of tax, for example TDS or contracts or fees or rent. Withholding tax code specify rate and calculation rules under the withholding tax type. So the next field, indicator subject to withholding tax. So the subject to withholding tax indicator in SAP specifies whether a vendor or customer is liable for withholding tax, which is nothing but TDS in India. If this checkbox is selected yes, SAP will calculate and deduct withholding tax during invoice or payment posting. Not selected no, SAP will not apply withholding tax even if the configuration exists. So the purpose, this indicator is used to activate withholding tax calculation for the business partner, ensure proper TDS deducted based on legal requirements, prevent tax calculation for exempt vendors or customers. The typical business scenarios, if selected yes, vendor is liable for withholding tax such as contractors, professional service providers, rent or commission service suppliers. If not selected no, vendor is not subject to TDS, for example vendor exemption under government rules, foreign vendor not taxable in the country, one-time vendor for small non-taxable purchases, exempt companies with valid exemption certificate which is provided by government bodies. So where it is used during invoice posting, FB60, Miro, FB70, F-02, payment run F110, adjustment and reversals. If enabled, SAP checks withholding tax type and withholding tax code, recipient type, exemption limits. All these four field SAP will select if the subject is selected yes. What SAP does internally? When it is enabled, SAP reads withholding tax type and withholding tax code, calculates TDS, posts withholding tax to proper GL accounts, store details in table like with underscore item. The next field is type of recipient. The type of recipient is a field in SAP's withholding tax setup that identifies the legal or business category of the vendor or customer who is receiving the payment. Different recipient types may be taxed differently based on government regulations. The purpose of type of recipient, this field helps SAP apply the correct withholding tax rules, exemptions and rates, distinguish tax treatment between different kind of payees, ensure compliance with statutory requirements. So the examples, some possible recipient types vary by country. So the recipient type is individual, the meaning is a person, freelancer or consultant, etc. And the recipient type is a company, registered business or legal entity. If the recipient type is partnership, then LLP, firm or partnership. If the recipient type is government, then the government body or department. If it is NGO, trust or non-profit organizations. Foreign vendor subject to different tax rules. These are all the examples. Different countries may define different recipient types based on the income tax law. So where it is used, again SAP checks type of recipient during invoice posting, FB60, Miro, F-02, FB70, all these T codes, and payment runs F110, withhold tax reporting. It helps determine applicable TDS percentage, minimum taxable limits, whether exemptions apply or not, tax posting logic. So the next field is withholding tax identification number. The withholding tax identification number is the official tax registration number of the vendor or customer used for withholding tax, which is nothing but TDS purposes. In India, when we talk about withholding tax, which is nothing but TDS, we are talking about TDS, tax deducted from the source. It is issued by the government tax authority and uniquely identifies the vendor for tax reporting and compliance. So the purpose of this withholding tax identification number is SAP stores this number so that it can be printed on statutory documents like a TDS certificates. It is includes in government tax filings and reports. Auditors and authorities can verify vendor tax status. SAP can validate exemption or tax applicability. These are all the purpose to use this withholding tax identification number. Examples: the purpose and format vary by country. So in India, PAN number, permanent account number is used. In US, EIN, employer identification number or SSN is used. In UK, UTR, unique taxpayer reference number is used. In Germany, so tax number or VAT ID. In Australia, ABN, Australian business number. Like this, these are all the examples. Country based, the number is going to change. When SAP uses it, SAP prints this number in TDS certificates, withholding tax reports, payment advice, statutory returns, during audits or reporting. This helps uniquely identify the vendor or customer. So the technical informations, it works along with withholding tax type, withholding tax code, exemption details if maintained, data stored in vendor master table like LF BW, LF B1, etc. So the next field is exemption certificate number. The exemption certificate number is SAP is the reference number of the official government issued certificate that exempts a vendor or customer from withholding TDS either fully or partially. This certificate is usually issued by the tax authority when the vendor qualifies for reduced tax deduction, qualifies for zero tax deductions, has special approval for exemption for a certain period. Purpose: this number is stored in the SAP so that the exemption can be legally validated. The number prints on statutory tax documents such as TDS certificate. Authorities or auditors can cross-check the exemption status. SAP knows not to deduct tax during invoice or payment posting based on exemption rules were used in SAP. During vendor invoice posting FB60 Miro, customer billing FB70, payment runs F110, withholding tax reporting, if the exemption conditions are satisfied in SAP, applies reduced or zero withholding tax, reflects the exemption reasons in tax reports. So these are all the used cases. Example, real life examples of exemption certificates. In India, the section 197 lawyer or nil TDS certificate. In US, W9 exemption declaration. In UK, tax arrangement approval for HMRC. In Germany, certificate for withholding relief under double taxation treaty. The typical scenario: a contractor submit a government certificate that allows TDS at 0% up to 10 lakh until 31st March 2026. You enter exemption certification number, validity dates, exemption limit and percentage. SAP ensures no tax deducted within the approval limit, which means until 31st March 2026 for up to 10 lakh rupees there is no TDS, which is 0%. So the next field is exemption rate for batch input. Exemption rate for batch input in SAP, especially in vendor master withholding tax type, which means it is the percentage of tax exemption that applies to a vendor when entering data through batch input, such as during mass uploads, data migration, recording programs, BDC, interfaces like LSMW, BABI, etc. Why it is used? If a vendor has a tax exemption certificate, they may not be required to pay full withholding tax. So instead of the normal withholding tax rate, for example 10%, SAP allows you to specify an exemption percentage such as 100% exemption, no tax deducted. 50% exemption, only half of the tax applies. So the example, normal TDS rate is 10%, vendor exemption rate is 6%. So effective tax calculated 10% multiply with 100 minus 60, which is equal to 4%. Okay, so the normal TDS is 10%. So vendor get exemption 60%, which means you can apply for only 4% for a specific vendor. In summary, exemption rate for batch input equal to a percentage used during mass data entry to reduce or fully waive withholding tax for a vendor based on exemption documentation. So the next field is date on which exemption begins. What it is? The start date of the tax exemption period granted to a vendor for withholding tax. From this date onward, SAP will apply the reduced or zero tax rate based on the exemption details. Why it is needed? Vendors who have a TDS exemption certificate, a lower deduction certificate, or a temporary tax relief are exempt only for a defined time. SAP must know when this exemption becomes effective. Example, if a vendor received an exemption validity from April 1, 2025 to March 31st, 2026, then date on which exemption begin is April 1, 2025. Date on which exemption end is 31 March 2026. During this period, SAP will apply the exemption percentage instead of the full tax rate. In simple words, the date on which exemption begins equal to the first day from which the vendor's withholding tax exemption becomes valid in our SAP system. So these are all the field which is coming under vendor withholding tax in company code data in our vendor master. Thank you.